because I got to record last time. And I am going to put our source sheets in the chat, but I can also, actually, I'll probably just share screen, go often on screen, but I can also, do people want me to put source sheets in the chat so they can look at it by themselves?
Put what in the chat?
The source sheets. It's okay. I'll just put them on the screen.
Mhm.
All right. First of all, I just want to check in. How is everybody doing? It's lovely to see your faces. And yesterday was certainly a rough day. How is everybody doing? Anybody want to check in? Just say a word.
The best we can.
Best we can. That's how I feel. In some ways, it's been it's been a constant October 7th memorial. So I felt that yesterday as we were sharing thoughts at Maharat, and as I was listening to the UJA event yesterday, and it's just so hard, and also every day has been hard. And I guess as a rabbi, I just feel obligated to look for hope. And when I was asking people what they're looking for over these high holidays, that was certainly a theme that came up over and over again. Of course, could be seen as a trite idea, because after all, what does it mean to just have hope? But I wanted to look at some of our liturgy and stories together to see what we can develop to hopefully lift us up just a little bit, and to give chizuk and strength to each of us. Okay, so all right, I wanted to, by way of introduction, I have been thinking about this scene, and I want to just play the video for you, and then I'm going to discuss afterwards what it is, just to set the stage. This is Rachel Goldberg and her family in John Poland. She and many of the other hostage families are standing on the Gaza border. They've gathered as close as they could to the as close as they possibly could to their beloved children or loved ones. This took place before Hirsch died, of course. And I just want to play the video for you, and we'll take it from there. So 1 second, let me just, okay, give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
It's Mama. Hirsch. It's day 328. We are all here. All the families of the remaining 107 hostages. Hirsch, we are working day and night, and we will never stop. I need you to know that I am giving you now the blessing I give you every single morning when I pray for you, and every Friday night I go out on the porch and I put my hands up toward Gaza and I give you the Kohanic blessing. May God bless you and keep you. May God shine his face upon you and be gracious to you.
Okay. Oh, that's a hard video to watch. When I saw this video and when I thought about it, and as Rosh Hashanah was approaching, I couldn't help but connect that scene to the image of Rachel Imenu, of Rachel calling out into the void, of raising her voice in Ramah. I know that Ravavi just spoke briefly about that verse. I'm going to take it into a slightly different direction. But I couldn't help but compare the image between our modern day Rachel and Rachel Imenu. And I started wondering what the similarities or messages one could derive from the other. And in a way, I was imagining them in dialogue with one another. Surely Rachel Goldberg knows of Rachel Imenu. Did she understand and draw strength and chizuk from Rachel Imenu? And vice versa, even though across time and space, is there a message that the psukim, the verses, the story of Rachel Imenu could share and teach us, and by extension, this modern day Rachel, who's now in grief and in mourning from the loss of her son, Hirsch? And the three areas that I wanted to focus on today are actually derived from Rachel Goldberg herself. At the end of that video, and really at the end of every single video that Rachel Poland made, she would end her words with the following. She would say, Hirsch, I love you, stay strong, survive. Those three words, love you, stay strong, and survive. And so I started wondering and thinking about that message of love being one of the first messages that perhaps Rachel derived from Rachel. So let me put our source sheet back on. And Estelle, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm not as good forgiving as you are or as other people, but to me, this would just prove the fact that you've got to do something more than just pray to God, because he's not listening, or she is not listening. I mean, how can you stand there and listen to her and say, you know, Hirsch is not hearing her, God is not listening to her, and she's just talking just to relieve her own agony.
Yeah, I think that it's very hard. And that's exactly why I want to turn to some of the words of our prophets to try to make sense of it, because it's a struggle. I know Ravavi just talked about the fact that we can not only lament and cry, but also question God and rail and be angry. And I guess that's what's propelling me forward to really try to understand, because I feel a loss. I feel devastated. I don't know if each of you also sort of got taken by the Poland family. It was hard not to have them as part of our daily mindset. They were so public, and so they represented my voice in so many ways, and they represented hope, actually, until they found out that Hirsch died. In fact, I'm not going to play this next video, but because it's really just too hard. But in the source sheets, some of you may have seen this video that was released on September 6th, which was just a few days after we found out that Hirsch died. And in that video, Hirsch says the words, "Stay strong for me," as if he heard his mother's constant message. I don't know that they did. I'm sure they did. I'm sure he didn't actually, but there's something, I don't know, like prophetic about the fact that Rachel said those words and he said them back. And in the same way, I think there might be something prophetic about Rachel Imenu, our foremothers' words as well. And if the job of a prophet is to be a leader, to be an advocate, to be a direct contact between the direction our world should be going and be a prophet of doom and a prophet of hope, then I wonder if Rachel is sort of our modern day prophet, much like Rachel and Yirmiyahu were. So let's actually start looking at the verses in Yirmiyahu. So of course, Jeremiah is known as a prophet of doom for most of the chapters of Jeremiah. He is prophesying how after the destruction of the first temple, he is railing against the Jewish people and their terrible actions, and trying to inspire them to be better and do better. And if you don't, this and this is going to happen to you. And it's really images of destruction and doom over and over and over again. And then towards the end of the book, around chapter 29, 30, 31, there's a switch in his tone, and it's as if he has an eye-opening experience and can begin to see some hope himself. And he begins to offer some words of comfort and nachama. And it's these verses that we read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Some of them you may be familiar to you. I'll read it in English and Hebrew, source number 3. It says, Korama Hashem kol barama nishma. I know that Rav Avi just talked about this. Nihi bechi tamurim Rachel mibaka al banea ma'ana lihnachem al banea ki enenu. Thus says the Lord, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentations and bitter weeping. Rachel, weeping for her children, refuses to be comforted for her children because they were not. Thus says the Lord, Korama Hashem, refrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work shall be rewarded, says the Lord. And they shall come again from the land of the enemy, and there is hope for your future, says the Lord, that your children shall come again to their own border. So we want to break this down a little bit. Why is Jeremiah suddenly talking about hope? What is it about Rachel's weeping and crying that somehow led ultimately, because what happens after this is that the people do indeed come back, even if it's briefly, back to Jerusalem, back to Israel, between the destruction of the first and second temples. So as I was saying, the first message that I think both Rachel and Rachel have in common is this message of love. I love you, stay strong, survive. And certainly Rachel Imenu is known for her message of being a mom and being a mother. We're going to talk a little bit more about her story, but remember in the Bible, in the stories in Tanakh, Rachel wanted so badly to have her own child. She prayed. She told Jacob that children were going to be better than him, which he was very insulted by. And I think that one of the core messages actually of these days is that of love. So let's see what I mean. In the Zichronot section, in the one of the major sections of the Musaf service over Rosh Hashanah is remembrance. And when you look at those verses, these verses from Jeremiah are quoted. I'm going to show you that in a few minutes. But in addition, the verses recall God's relationship with many of our forefathers. And that relationship of Zichronot is recalled ba'ahava, with love. So just looking at source number 4, in the Machzor, we see, V'gam et Noach ba'ahava zacharta. And Noach too, you remembered with love, and decreed for him a promise of deliverance and rachamim and compassion. So the way God remembers is ba'ahava, but berachamim. The word rachamim, of course, compassion, is from the word rechem, or womb. And there's some kind of connection between compassion and a motherly love. Taking it one step further, just a few verses later, the continuation from the section of Yirmiyahu continues and says, Haben yakir li Ephraim. Truly, Ephraim is a dear son to me, a child that is delight. Whenever I have turned against him, my thoughts would dwell in him. That is my heart. My heart yearns for him. I receive him back, b'ha'ava, in love, in compassion, with rachamim. Set up these markers, these signposts, and you will return. So who is Ephraim? Right? Who is Ephraim in the Torah? What is Ephraim's relationship to Rachel? Anybody remember? Ephraim, of course, is Rachel's grandson, right? If Joseph is Rachel's oldest, and Joseph gave birth to Ephraim and Manasseh, So Rachel, who didn't live to see him, her grandchild is Ephraim. So when you think about this connection between Ephraim Yakirli, Ephraim, my dear, dear child, there's a connection between grandmother and grandson, between mother and child, a connection between the fact that Rosh Hashanah is supposed to be a symbol of love, a symbol of love, but what kind of love specifically? A parental love, a love between kin, between grandparents and parents and children. And it's that relationship which has to do with zichronot, because part of that relationship is about passing on memories, it's about passing on our tradition, it's about passing on our previous life, our previous lives. And so there's like the connection between memory and compassion and love and motherhood gets all mushed together. And what emerges, I think, is what may be an obvious point, but the most unconditional relationship, the most unconditional, compassionate love is between a parent and a child. And I think we see this must be a message that Rachel Goldberg Polin, I think, got from these verses, from these psukim, from Rachel Imenu, because although it's obvious that a mother loves her child, the way in which Rachel always talked about Hirsch was unconditional. In fact, at Hirsch's funeral, one section of Rachel Goldberg Polin's eulogy that was so meaningful to me is she says that Hirsch was not the perfect child, but he was the perfect child for her, acknowledging that love is not contingent on a child being perfect, but love is contingent on the fact that he was her child. And so the first message that I imagine the dialogue between Rachel and Rachel is that of just straight up parental love, a love that is compassionate, one that I think I hold as a central component of what we can draw out of these Yamim Noraim these days. The second message that I imagine Rachel Goldberg got from Rachel Imenu is one of self-sacrifice and advocacy. Now, certainly, there's no question that Rachel Goldberg, for this past 11 months before she found out her son died, they dedicated their whole entire being to advocacy. They traveled around the world. They met with leaders. They did everything they possibly could to try to get to move the powers that be, to try to get not only their son, but she became a voice and an advocate for all the hostages. She represented not only her own son, but Americans and Druze and Christians and Muslims and all those that were held in and are held in captivity. And this message of self-sacrifice is one that came naturally to Rachel as well, to Rachel Imenu, our foremother as well. So the Midrash is trying to understand what it was about Rachel Imenu in these verses in Jeremiah that moved God. What is it about Rachel's weeping that moved God to bring the Jewish people back to Jerusalem? And so the Midrash imagines this crazy scenario. And I'm going to summarize some of it and read some of it inside. The Midrash imagines that after the temple was destroyed, God wept and he said to Jeremiah, "Go summon Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Moshe. Have them come and plead on behalf of Israel. I want to hear their argument. Let me hear why I should forgive. I should forgive the Jewish people and bring them back." And I cut out this middle section because it's really long, but each of these men come before God and they try with all their arguments and they talk about the ways in which God needs to forgive and it's not their fault, and God is unmoved. And then suddenly the Midrash imagines Rachel broke forth into speech before God and said, "Sovereign of the universe, it is revealed before you that the servant Jacob loved me exceedingly and toiled for me for my father on my behalf for 7 years, right? So we know this story from the Torah, that Jacob and Rachel saw each other at the well. They fell in love, and Jacob immediately wanted to marry Rachel and promised to work 7 years for Rachel's hands. When those 7 years were completed and the time arrived for my marriage with my husband, my father planned to substitute another for me to wed my husband for the sake of my sister, right? Lavan realized, or maybe he always knew, that Leah was older and Leah needed to get married first. And so the Midrash imagines Lavan sitting Rachel down and saying, Rachel, Jacob, I'm sorry, you can't get married. It's Leah's turn. She has to get married first. And so Rachel says, it was very hard for me because the plot was known to me and I disclosed it to my husband. And I gave him a sign whereby he could distinguish between me and my sister so that my father should not be able to make the substitution. So the Midrash imagines Rachel and Yaakov in cahoots with one another. They're creating a system, a sign language, so that Rachel would be able to convey to Jacob if it was really her underneath that veil and not Leah. But then the Midrash continues. After that, I relented, suppressed my desire, and had pity upon my sister that she should not be exposed to shame. In the evening, they substituted my sister for me with my husband, and I delivered over to my sister all the signs which I had arranged with my husband, so that he should think that she was Rachel. More than that, I was beneath the bed upon which he lay with my sister, and when he spoke to her, she remained silent, and I made all the replies in order that he should not recognize my sister's voice. Can you imagine that? Not only did Rachel teach Leah the signs, but she laid underneath the bed. She slept underneath the marriage bed so that Jacob would not recognize that Leah was not Rachel until the next morning. And this somehow moved God. This somehow was what moved God to usher back the Jewish people. The Midrash ends, I did her a kindness. I was not jealous of her and did not expose her to shame. And if I, a creature of flesh and blood, formed of dust and ashes, was not envious of my rival and did not expose her to shame and contempt, why should you, a king who lives eternally and art merciful, be jealous of idolatry, right? What is God's greatest flaw, if one can call it? God's greatest flaw is to be jealous. God was jealous, easily made jealous of idols. And Rachel's saying, if I am only flesh and blood and I wasn't jealous of my sister Leah, God, don't be jealous that the people worshipped idols. You got to be better than that. You got to be bigger than that. And once the mercy of God was stirred and said, for you, Rachel, I will restore Israel to their place. And so it is written, thus saith the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentations and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children, she refuses to be comforted for her children, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so here
It's quite a story.
It's quite a story. It's an insane story. It's an insane story of somebody who became who saw themselves as a sacrificial lamb, so to speak, who would do anything for the sake of a future. And in that way, I imagine once again that Rachel Goldberg maybe drew strength from the story, maybe drew strength from her and her willingness and ability to sacrifice herself and become an advocate, not only for her child, but for all of the hostages. And I find myself missing that voice. Of course, it's so understandable that Rachel and her family are mourning and grieving on their own. They've certainly earned the right to have a private life. But that constant message of coming to my sort of directly into my home and speaking words of hope is lost. And so I feel sort of bereft without her words. And I wonder if Rachel Goldberg drew some strength from Rachel, could we now find words of strength from Rachel Imenu and offer it back sort of as a gift to Rachel Goldberg to help her find some hope once again in these dark, dark times? And so the next section is, how do we find hope? Where is this message of redemption and hope? So what I noticed from these verses in Jeremiah is it has the language of Rachel weeping, and it says that she refused to be comforted. Me'ana lenachem al baneha. Rachel wept and she refused to be comforted. What does that mean? What does it mean that somebody refuses to be comforted, right? I can understand that, like, if there's deep grief and somebody's in mourning, you don't want to be comforted. You want to crawl into a hole. You want to, disappear into a under your covers into your dark room. But what does it mean that she refused to be comforted? Jeremiah must have known the words from Bereshit. If we see Jeremiah, the later books of prophecy, as one of the first interpretations of the 5 books of Torah, then Jeremiah surely knew the stories in Bereshit and lifted those words directly from the story of Jacob and his sons. So let's remember the story in Bereshit that Joseph had been thrown into a pit by his brothers, and his brothers tore his colored coat from him. They dipped it in an animal's blood, and they brought that torn garment back to Yaakov, their father, and they told their father that he was dead. And the pasuk says, "Vayakumu kol banav v'kol banotav lenachamo v'yamein lenachem v'yomer ki ared ki b'ni avel she'olav yavrech otob aviv." And all the sons and daughters rose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Same language. He said, "I shall go to my grave mourning for my son." So there too, Mefarshim are aware of the similarity between these two languages and ask the question, what does it mean, that one refuses to be comforted? For what reason? And in this crazy twist, the Sofrim, which is a source that is concurrent the same time as the Talmud, when the Talmud was written, the Sofrim says, because one is never comforted for the loss of someone who is still alive, whereas the dead are forgotten. As it's written, I've been forgotten from his heart like the dead. We have to unpack this a little bit. What does that mean? The Sofrim is saying that one refuses to be comforted for somebody who is not actually dead. Implying what? Implying that Jacob, deep in his heart, understood and knew that Joseph was not actually dead. He refused to be comforted because he maintained and retained hope that his son was actually still alive. He refused to be comforted because he knew he was not actually dead. If his son was actually dead, then he would accept comfort. He would be comforted. He would have to sort of accept that nachama. But he understood at some part of him that his son was not actually dead. Now, I am not making any connection between the fact that Hirsch, Rachel's son, is actually alive. We know that he is dead. But I think what's not lost, perhaps, is the ability to refuse to be comforted, meaning we can't help but hope that there will be some kind of redemption. There will be that there will be some kind of end in sight. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know like how it's going to come about, but it has to be. And I think that Rachel Imenu is a symbol of this. Rachel is the only the only patriarch and matriarch of ours who is not buried in Hebron, in Marat HaMachpelah. Where was she buried? The Torah tells us that she died on the roadside, on the way, and she's buried b'derech Ephrata, on the road to Ephrat, which is now Beit Lechem. And Yaakov set up a pillar, a stone there, and in fact, her grave remains there to this very day. And although it's hard to get to, it has become a symbol, a pilgrimage space where people go and daven and yearn for something better. Bereshit Rabba says, what was Jacob's reason for burying Rachel on the way? Why didn't they move her at a later point to Maharat HaMachpelah when everybody was ultimately buried there? Because Jacob saw that the exiles would pass on from there. Therefore, he buried her there so that he might pray for mercy for them, for Rachamim. Thus it's written, a voice is heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. Thus saith the Lord, refrain your voice from weeping, and there is hope for your future. V'yesh tikva la'acharetecha, la'acharetech ne'um Adonai v'shavu banim. Your children will return. I want to take this one step further. Rabbi Hanan Porat, who is a modern day scholar, he is not alive anymore, but I was really taken by an interpretation in an article that I read about some questions that he's struggling with over these verses in Jeremiah. And he asks two questions, just going back to the top. He asks, what does it mean when it says, thus says the Lord, refrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work shall be rewarded. What does that mean, your work shall be rewarded? And the second question he asks is, what does it mean when it says, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping? In Hebrew, it's bechi tamrurim. What is a tamrurim? And again, further down, it has that same word, tamrurim. What does that mean? The translation doesn't fully capture what that word means. So what does it mean that your work shall be rewarded? And what are these, what does it mean to bechi tamrurim? So we're going to break those two down. And he says, we are not dealing here with weeping of mourning and not with nostalgic yearning for what once was and is no more, but rather with bechi tamrurim, with bitter weeping, which rises upwards and faces the future. The bechi tamrurim stands like a road sign and sends out directions, both to the children who are asked to return home and to God, who is asked to return the children to their own border. Therefore, this weeping of Rachel is called by an unusual term, pe'ulah, or work, as is stated in the verse, keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work shall be rewarded. At first glance, it's strange to refer to weeping by the term pe'ulah, which denotes creative activity. But the truth is that Rachel's weeping is functional weeping that does its job and does not rest, neither for the father nor for the children until they return home. This image of functional weeping, of productive tears, of signposts that are supposed to direct us forward to the future. That's what Rachel symbolized. That's what her grave symbolized. That's what her weeping symbolized. It's the work, the functional weeping, the tears that would ultimately propel the Jewish people home, would ultimately propel the Jewish people to a better place. And that's why it says in Yirmiyahu, V'yesh tikva, there's hope. There's hope for your future, declares God. Your children shall return. V'shavu banim, we shall return. And I want to just end with Rachel Goldberg Poland's words at the funeral, where my interpretation is that she's turning to us, to Hirsch's neshama, and asking to find a way back to hope. Finding a way back to not maybe right now, not this minute, not so soon after this terrible tragedy, but I think she's a person that lives her life in a productive way, and in order to put one foot in front of the other, has to do so guided by hope, whatever that means. She says, now my Hirsch, I ask for your help. As we transform our hope into grief and this new unknown brand of pain, I beg you, please do what you can to have your light shine down on me, Dada, Libby, and Orly. Help shower us with healing and resilience. Help us to rise again. I know it will take a long time, but please may God bless us that one day, one fine day, Dada, Libby, Orly, and I will hear laughter. And we will turn around and see that it's us and that we are okay. You will always be with us as a force of love and vitality. You will become our superpower. And Hirsch, I need you to do one last thing for us. Now I need you to help us to stay strong. And I need you to help us survive. I love you. Stay strong. Survive. Let me stop sharing and see if anybody has any comments, thoughts, or questions.
Thank you. I have to say thank you. That was quite a shield.
It helps me. It helps me think about how to keep going in this very dark time. And I wish I could share it with Rachel and that she could receive it with love and find her message back, her way back. We need her voice and her advocacy. Thank you.
I thought your voice was pretty good on that. I must say, Sarah, I'm very impressed.
Thanks, Estelle. I miss you. It's really good to see you.
Wow.
Thank you, everybody, for going on this with me.
Sara, it's Jane.
Hi, Jane.
I almost think that if you were to put this in a letter form, it would come from Hirsch to her as a strength that he's giving them. It was really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been
Very special, really beautiful. And it you could almost hear Hirsch's voice in it.
Yeah.
I hear you, Mama.
Yeah. That's a beautiful idea, Jane. Thank you.
it's
Rev up the guts to do it.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
I think that you should send the whole thing that you just said to us to Hirsch's mother. I'm sure she'd appreciate it and get a strength from it.
Hirsch's mother doesn't need that. We need Sarah.
No, we
Right
need
here.
her, but she could, she would appreciate it too.
Maybe.
I know that the community she's surrounded with, one of my students at Maharat, is part of the synagogue shul community that they daven at Hakel in Baka in Jerusalem. And they've had to rely very heavily, thank God, on that community. And that community has been able to carry them and lift them up through this past year. So I'm grateful just knowing that, because I mean, I think Estelle is right that they're going through a lot. So I would want to give them space. And I also, somebody told me that there's a website or an email address that I have now that are collecting ideas. Because I don't think I'm the only one that thought of like the similarity between Rachel and Rachel. I think my direction is maybe new and unique, but there's an attempt to sort of gather all of these, and maybe one day they'll share it with the family. So there is, I think, a way for me ultimately, if I choose to do so.
Not
Well,
right
I
now.
don't know about they, but we needed you. We needed you, and I want to thank you, because just listening to you was very uplifting. Let's put it that way. It's been very difficult for everybody.
I can't believe it's been a year and we're still in it.
Wow. I just wanted to thank you. This is the only time we're going to be seeing you.
Hop in and out. I toured over the summer a little bit, and when Stephen pulls me in.
I mean, Stephen has his own thing, but we need you.
Thanks, Estelle. Yeah, no, I don't mean taking instead of Stephen, but when there's like a series that all the rabbinic team participates in, that's when I get pulled in to teach, which I'm always happy to do. So stay tuned.
Yeah. And thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Rabba.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Love you all. Thank you
Yeah.
for
Chatzima tova.
coming and to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.